My name is Dee Roberts, and I'm the Reference and Outreach Librarian here at Pitt's Theology Library at Candler. And I have the privilege and honor of being the supervisor for this Morgan Fellows program that we have. So welcome, good afternoon. Hello to all of you in person, but also greetings to all of our virtual friends joining us today. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this year's Morgan Forum, That the Scriptures Should Come to Light, William Tyndale and 500 Years of the English New Testament. Today is a special occasion on which we gather not to just exchange ideas, but to recognize and celebrate a remarkable group of individuals, our Morgan Fellows. Sharing his collection with those both inside and outside of traditional academia was a value of Michael Morgan's. He often would open his home library to students, giving them an opportunity to engage closely with the treasures in his collection. And that is the spirit that is embodied in our Morgan Fellows program. The Morgan Fellows program is a 6-week primary research intensive opportunity where master's level students dive deeply into a self-selected item from the J. Michael Morgan collection. Our fellows come from diverse backgrounds and represent both Candler School of Theology and Columbia Theological Seminary. What unites them is a shared drive to ask important questions, to listen deeply, and to contribute in ways that extend beyond themselves. Ayodele John, Kwan, Sergio, and Tina have spent the last several weeks engaging in the work of provenance, tracing their items through time and space to give us all a glimpse into the stories behind how these 8 items came to be and why we should care about them now. They've learned the skills of creating descriptive metadata, creating infographics, which you can find in your folders, and they have also gained tools for giving engaging presentations and how to narrow scope and focus when there are just a lot of rabbit holes that one can dive down. So the Morgan Forum stands as a space for thoughtful dialogue, fresh perspectives, and meaningful connections to the past, present, and future of the Bible. At its core, it reflects a belief that scholarship is not just about achievement, but about curiosity and courage to engage with complex challenges. So I am excited for all of you to learn from this year's cohort and to be challenged by them, and to see how they weave the stories of relevance for items compiled long ago. To everyone here today, thank you for being part of this year's forum, for being here to support this year's fellows, and for continuing to help us foster a space where ideas and learning can flourish. So without more yapping from me, I am honored to welcome our 2026 Morgan Fellows.
My name is Jaykwon Hosey, and I am a Master of Divinity and Practical Theology student at Columbia Theological Seminary, and I am extremely grateful to be here. My item from the Morgan collection is the 1706 John A. Johnson Psalter with inscriptions by William Whitehead, an 18th century British poet laureate. I must express my deepest gratitude to Brady Beard here at Pitt's Library, the folks who are so diligent in carrying up in special collections. And last but not least, Michael Robertson. I work with him as an archives associate at Columbia's library, and he helped me to transcribe a lot of this old, fading English handwriting in this book, but I enjoyed every second of it. So yes, thank you to those good people. In roughly 15 minutes, this presentation will cover what I consider 3 streams. One is the retrievable details of the physical book. One is a paraphrased history of the translation of the Psalms in the book. And lastly, we will walk through some of what is in it, particularly a couple of notes and poems left by William Whitehead, who became a poet laureate in 1758 and served until his death in 85. This particular psalter, with some commentary and the defense of the translation, was composed through the efforts of Reverend John A. Johnson. He was born in 1662 in Cranbrook, just southeast of London. He was a clergyman of the Church of England and a Hebrew and Greek scholar, and also a trained theologian and Hebraist. He received his bachelor's from Cambridge in 1681 and his master's from Corpus Christi College afterward, and served at the parish in Cranbrook for about 18 years. He lived and died in Appledore, where he was when he put the Psalter together. Thank you. This Psalter was printed at Angel and Crown Bookstore in St. Paul's Churchyard near St. Paul's Cathedral in London. I found that St. Paul's Churchyard was a hub where many booksellers and buyers came to buy, sell, and trade books, and they were likely clergy or academics seeking theological and religious texts. It was published by William Downing Productions, and William Downing was the father of Joseph Downing, to whom the publishing company was passed on. In some of the directories, Joseph's name kept coming up under Downing, and I discovered that William was his father and left it to him. So again, we really get into a little of the book in a few minutes, but for starters, here's what we have on the first page. Directions for the more devout use of the Psalms and a short historical account of translation and translators. The Psalter or Psalms of David, after the translation of the Great Bible, pointed as they are to be sung or said in churches with large explanatory notes, a general defense of this old translation in answer to all the objections and cavils that have been raised against it. Beneath this is the art of poetry. This was, to my knowledge, coined by Quintus Horatius, a Roman poet from way back in the day. Also above this is nec verbum verbo carabis redire, and I believe this to be Latin, so I'm pretty sure I mispronounced it, but it reads, as a translator, you will take care not to translate word for word. This Psalter was printed for Robert Knaplock, a very well-known bookseller again in the 18th century, and Johnson's personal bookseller and mentor to his son, and he published many materials for the Church of England. So in tracing the story of this specific translation of Psalms, I began to gather an idea of why Johnson republished it in this book and sought to defend it in light of the contention its coming into being stems from. In the early 16th century, there was a Hebraist named John Campenses, a student of theology at the University of Louvain, who did some comparative study of the doctrine of Paul's epistles and other sacred books. Around 1522, he began to study it in its original language, which led him to Hebrew, and this was influenced by his mentor, Matthew Adriani, another Hebrew scholar. In May of 1532, John published a paraphrase of the psalm, at this time a professor at the University of Louvain, the same school he attended, and what was interesting was that he resigned after the university's faculty blocked his publication of the psalm paraphrase. I didn't read much into the story past that, but this controversy foreshadowed what became decades of religious and political conflict involving these psalms. Particularly during the 1500s to 1550s period, Miles Coverdale translated John's paraphrase and rendering of the psalm from Latin into English. A paraphrase translates the ancient Hebrew of Psalms into modern language for liturgical purposes. And there are said to be two original copies of the English translation of this Psalter, one in the British Museum in London, printed by Thomas Gibson in 1539, and another at the Lincoln Cathedral Library, printed in 1535. I also read that the earliest recorded edition of the English translation of John's Psalm was printed at Antwerp in 1535, but maybe was not the first edition. And Coverdale's preface shows some hesitation about his capacity to translate, in which in it he writes, and I'll just read some of this, and as I do with all humbleness submit mine understanding in my poor translation unto the Spirit of truth and your grace, so make I this protestation, having God to record in my conscience, that I have never rested nor altered so much as one word for the maintenance of any manner of sect. But we have a clear conscience, purely and faithfully translated this, purely and faithfully translated this out of 5 sundry interpreters. And there was also a copy of John's Psalm in English, dated in 1534, with no place or printer's name, only the printer's mark, and it was owned by a woman named Leah Wilson, and eventually passed on to Henry Lennox, who seemed to have been a librarian and book collector, and who included it in his collection in 1887, but it has since disappeared. So some sort of narrative is the most effective way to structure knowledge over a span of 200 years. In considering provenance, I mentioned 2 streams earlier, the physical book, and the second is the specific translation of Psalms that is in it, which stretches back more than 100 years before 1706. Here, this particular Psalter, which Johnson republished, was the first psalm used in the Great Bible, completed in writing on October 4th, 1535, and dedicated to King Henry VIII in 1539. And many people tagged it old translation, as we saw Johnson use earlier. Coverdale called his book containing these psalms a special translation, not as a checker, reprover, or despiser of other men's translation, but lowly and faithfully following his interpreters, and that under conviction. The Book of Common Prayer became a site of contention. The Act of 1534 declared the king was the only supreme head of the earth of the Church of England, and the crown shall enjoy all honors, dignities, privileges, profits, etc. And this was reinforced through mandatory oaths that required people to swear allegiance to the monarch and to the religion. An act of uniformity in Parliament took place on January 21st, 1549, under King Edward VI. Every time a new act of uniformity was set in years 1552, 1559, and 1662, specifically authorizing the book, it made the book the only permitted form of religious ritual and public prayer and worship. Some use it alongside the Sternhold and Hopkins Psalms, and within this Book of Common Prayer was the appearance of the Coverdale translation of Psalms. Again, from 1550 to 1662, there were contentions around the book and religion, and it was outlawed in the 1640s, then reinstated in the 1660s. According to Johnson, at the Savoy Conference, which began in April of 1661, during the restoration of King Charles II under the Act of Uniformity, this rendering of Psalms was preferred by the convocation of bishops and clergy, over any other Psalms written in English, that is, the Psalms in the Book of Common Prayer. And Johnson writes regarding this, and it's on here, up here to the screen, to the right, and I can't think them more competent judges in such matters. In the 17th century, the Book of Common Prayer and the ways in which Parliament exercised power and regulated religious life was shaped by the book that contained the Psalms. So roughly 1,500 to 2,000 clergy were kicked out for refusing to swear by it. Following this, one law in 1664 prohibited religious gatherings outside of the Church of England from having more than 5 people, and the 5 Mile Act of 1666 required former clergy to live more than 5 miles from their former parishes and churches. So to track this psalm down by way of the Great Bible I had to track this psalm down by way of the Great Bible and or the Book of Common Prayer. What was Johnson saying by publishing it and defending it? He began printing tracts, which were religious pamphlets, before publishing this Psalter. A story went he was made aware that some folks in his church had spoken ill of him and made plans to spirit up a party in the parish against him, but ultimately never saw it through. Here are a few of Johnson's reasons for printing this Psalter. He writes, as to the translation which is here printed, explained, and vindicated, and which is commonly used in our churches and ought to be valued by all English Protestants, it is for no other reason yet because it is part of that Bible with which the eyes of our ancestors in King Henry VIII's time were first enlightened with divine truth. And they who were chiefly concerned in the translating and publishing of it were 3 men who were very useful instruments in the reformation of religion by writing, preaching, and suffering for it. I mean William Tyndale, so he spells Tyndale, Tindall, John Rogers, and Miles Coverdale. Some account of those lives and deaths hereafter follows. And lastly, this is the third sort of stream, which includes some of the writing and inscriptions by William Whitehead on the inside. On this slide, we see some of the writings by William Whitehead I mentioned earlier. This top portion provides some information about Johnson through Whitehead's eyes, imparting the question marks and the vagueness in some of this. But Whitehead's writing here was a reliable source once I figured out what it said. This book is said to have been written by J. Johnson, A.M. Lee Gent, and I'm reading verbatim. A.M. Lee Gent, he lived at Cranbrook. Watson's collection of tracts, I mentioned earlier, he started printing tracts. The Relator of the Orthodox Churchman's Mag tells us of his 9th volume of 1805, that he was rector of Cranbrook, Kent, author of the Clergyman's Vade Mecum, Walk With Me, The Unbloody Sacrifice, a scarce, valuable book. This top portion reads, to the first degree, heavenly will had made the monarch free. The fond restraint of man I scorn to own, but grasp the full possession of the crown. Indulge in ease I wild without control, and to thy utmost which employed my soul, vain boast of power, which vanished into air since I forgot the Lord who placed me there. So these poems are both written, or these poems both written by Whitehead, and the second is, excuse me, whenever the horrid deed I backward trace, my soul rolls inward and forget her peace. Waking I dream in the silent night, a frightful vision stalks before my sight. Pale Uriah walks in his dreadful round, he shames his head and points to every wound. Soul disgraced to arms, who will go to fight my battles and repel the foe? This illustration was very interesting, I thought. And I was kind of stuck on this for a few days, actually. This image of Uriah haunting David in his sleep. And if you know the story, you might, like me, understand why this is evocative. But I think this poet, Whitehead, in this moment, a couple of 100 years ago, uses poetry to capture an unrevealed moment or happening in the Bible through a unique employment of imagination, seeing beyond this flat inscription and into the story. Whitehead, with the same theme in mind, he wrote a fiction-based story on Anne Boleyn, who owned many Psalters, the wife of King Henry VIII, and he executed her during his reign. And in this story, in her last words to her husband, Whitehead writes, "And must thy wife be heaven's severe command? Before this throne thy sad accusers stand. O Henry, chain my tongue, thy guilt atone, prevent my sufferings, prevent thy own. O hear me, heaven, since Henry's still unkind, then let me bear thy mandate from on high. With kind forgiveness let this Anna fly, from every pang the much love suffer free, and breathe that mercy he denies me." And in closing, all the threads that tie this book's narrative together, as well as the broader cultural phenomenon and historical literature it stems from, I reflect on what of the story I could gather. What did I miss, and what will I still seek after this moment, even in passing? With the Psalter from the 1700s sitting in front of me, just a month ago, I knew there were and are still many streams in history that had yet to be discovered. Thank you.